Welcome back to Metal Gear RC. We're here in the Wrenching Nut RC garage, and today I have a tech tip for you: how to bind your FLYSKY receiver to your no-bill NB4. Now, there's two different types of receivers: one with a binding button and one without a binding button. And today I will be going over the one that doesn't have the binding button. Now, remember, for this controller here, the protocol needs to be a AFHDS3 protocol for it to bind with the radio. And I will show you how to bind it and not have any issues, especially being a new receiver. It more likely will need to have updated firmware. So I'll show you how I do it so I have no issues down the road. As well as, bonus, I'll show you how to hook up an external sensor to it towards the end. Let's get to it. All right, so you need to make sure your receiver is the proper protocol, the one right here, AFHDS3 protocol, to bind with your controller. Now, this is the one I'm going to go over with, is the one that doesn't have the binding button. And there's different types like this. So you'll be able to do the same thing with all of them that doesn't have the binding button. So you'll need your receiver, a binding jumper. I'm just going to use this battery pack here for my power source. You can use an ESC if you like to, but as long as it puts out between the voltage that is specified on the receiver itself. Usually they're between 3.5 to 9 volts. This one here is up to 12 volts, and it's safe for this receiver. As well as, you're going to need your controller for updating it as well as binding it. So first thing I usually like to do, especially if it's brand new, usually if it's brand new and you try to bind it, it will give you an error saying it can't find it or it won't bind. So you need to put it into the update firmware mode. To be able to put in an update firmware mode, you'll look at your receiver and you'll see the binding. So this top row here is your binding, where you will put the binding jumper at. But to put it in the firmware mode, you have to know your pin orientation. And as you can see, the little slit up here indicates the first pin right here is your signal pin. And that's the pin we're going to look at. Now, instead of hooking it straight up and down, we're going to go like this. So it will bind the binding pin. It will bind the binding pin and the channel 3. Make sure it's like this, where the signal wire is jumped to channel 3. Now, if you're using a different one, it may be channel 7 or it may be a channel 6 or 5, depending on the type of receiver you're using. But just make sure it's connected to the binding signal wire and it's jumped to the signal wire of however your jumper is set up, which is, it's 2 pins down. So here's your pin 1, 2, 3. So it's 3 pins down. So that's how you set it up for your firmware update. Next, we'll go ahead and we'll take our power source and plug it in. Make sure it's orientated correctly. You pretty much plug it into any spot, and now your receiver is ready to update its firmware. Go to the controller here. We'll go ahead and hold the power button. Now, if you just turn it on, the screen shouldn't be locked. If it's locked, just make sure this lock icon is not red. If it's red, just hold it down, unlock the screen. We'll go ahead and hit the little gear icon. Now we need to go to model. When we go to model, we're going to go here to select model. We're going to find a new one that we want to connect it to. Let's say I want to connect it to 10. Yes, I want to change it. Now I've changed it over to the model 10. We can rename this later. Go back out. So once we go out, we're going to go to channel number definition. And this depends on your receiver. If it's a 4, 6, or 8, ours is 4. We'll make sure it is selected as the green little dot right there. It says we're on 4. If you do that, it'll say, hey, if you change it, if it's binded already, you got to rebind it, but it's a brand new one. So so you'll select either 4, 6, or 8, depending on your receiver. Go out, and then you do the radio frequency setup. We're going to go to the first one. Now, this is the top protocol I was telling you about. Now, this is a one-way, and this is a two-way. One-way is going to communicate from your radio to your receiver. The second one is where the radio will communicate with the receiver, and the receiver can communicate with your radio. Your receiver can communicate with your radio. That's what you want, especially if you're going to be using any external sensors, or at least you want to know the voltage that's going into your receiver itself. So we'll select that. Now these are if you have mini Z's, and this one right here will hook up to your ready to run mini Z's. And this one here would go with your, as it says, the Evo, which you'll have to get a FLYSKY receiver for your mini Z. That's what that's for. And that's just different protocols. And so we'll make sure it's set up for that. So we have our two-way communication. So you'll get all your options out of your receiver. So after we select it, we'll go ahead, update the RF, and that's the transmitter board in your radio. We'll go ahead, update it. Yep, want to update, just make sure everything's up to date, especially if you've done any updates to your controller. You definitely want to do that. Go back out, and then we go back out again. Now we'll go to the RX set, and that's icon right here, the RX set. We'll go into that one. Now, we're not going to do the bind yet because we want to make sure the firmware is up to date on the receiver. We'll go to update receiver, which it should be the last one on the menu. We'll verify and make sure that we have the right one selected, as this one is the FGR4 and this is the FGR4. Yes, it's a version 2, but as long as those first ones are correct. Now, if you have a different version, you'll find it right here, like this one here, and you'll select that one. But for this one here, it'll probably either one of these at the top. So it's already selected, and then when we hit update, because it's already set up, ready to go, when I hit this, it's going to find it and update it. And you always want to make sure, if you're doing this in a public place, that no one else is trying to do this too. It's best to do this at home, away from anyone else that is trying to do the same thing you're doing. So we're going to hit update. And here it's letting you to know, make sure you have it set up. And I have it set up, and hit OK. It's going to start looking. and it is updating because now it's found the receiver. It will update the firmware, and once the firmware is completed, it will just go ahead and exit out to that menu. Now we can go ahead and back out. Well, you don't have to back out all the way. You stay in RX set because we still need to do the bind set. So we'll go ahead and cycle the power by pulling the power out, remove the jumper, and now we're going to place it in the bind port here, just like so. So it's jumping the bind to the negative, or the sensor bind to the negative on the sensor servo port. We'll go ahead and apply power again. As you see, it's blinking fast because it's in the bind mode. Now we'll go up here and we'll select bind. This is a classic, and it will let you know. So if I hit classic, and it will tell you which ones, as we're using the FGR4, sorry. We're using that one, or any one of these, you will use the classic. But if you're using a different version and you don't see it there, you're going to be using the enhance, which we're not doing that one because we're doing the classic, which doesn't have the binding button. So we'll go ahead, hit the start binding because we're already in the binding mode on the receiver. And as you can see right here, we have our receiver battery voltage. So we know we're bind to it as well. Now you can go ahead, go through some of here and set up some of the protocols. Yes, we got PWM out, and this is for your sensors. So depending on what type of sensor you're using, as this one here is a voltage sensor, there's also different type of sensors out there. One for current, I can't think of them all, but there's quite a few different ones, and you can daisy chain that to this one as well. So this is where you'll set that up. Now, servo frequencies, this will set the default of all of them. If you're using the old analog style, you can do it here, digital, or if you're using particular servos or an ESC that can handle a lot faster refresh, you can select it here, as well as you can change it up. So if your digital doesn't work so great, you can select your custom and you can actually change it here. Or even if it's an analog, but you need a lot lower refresh rate, you'll set it here. And as you see, it's going way down. Well, actually analog is 50 hertz refresh rate. So we're going to stay with digital, servo, and we're pretty much ready to run. I would definitely suggest power cycling it, remove your jumper, and your receiver is now ready to be used with your controller. So in this part of the video, I'm going to show you how to hook up an external sensor, as this one here is a voltage sensor, and it can go up to 100 volts input on these leads here, and a negative 100 volts as well. So you can actually hook up these leads backwards, and it'll indicate on your screen if it is hooked up backwards or you're getting a negative voltage on here. And now this is your sensor output, the wire that comes out. This is where you will plug this one into your receiver. And on this receiver here, it's the one at the very bottom, label sends for sensor. We'll go ahead and plug it in the correct orientation. If your doesn't have the little flange there or it's broken off, just make sure the white sensor wire is at the top there. Now you could daisy chain these, and here is your input from your other sensor. So you could plug into this one here. So if you have amperage or RPM or I think there's a motor temp sensor as well, you can plug these daisy chain. So you don't have to plug them all into the receiver. You just daisy chain them on here, and your controller will sense it automatically. And I'll show you the screen to use if you're troubleshooting it. So I'll go ahead, I'm going to plug it up to the battery that I'm going to be using. Actually, I'm going to go ahead, I'll put it backwards just to show you. So I have the battery plugged in backwards. We'll go ahead and plug in the receiver battery pack. And the receiver itself actually has a voltage meter as well for what power is inputted into the receiver. And I'll show you how to set a sensor on that, especially if you're a nitro person. You may be using a battery pack and you just want to monitor, make sure it's not dying on you. You can do that with these receivers as well. So let's go to the controller. So to get to the sensors menu, saying I haven't touched it, you go to this gear icon, touch the gear icon, and the sensor icon here will bring you to the sensor menu. Now, there is another way to get there. The sensor display up here, you select that and it brings you to the same thing. Now, while you're troubleshooting, make sure everything is connected correctly. Now, everything has to be powered up and plugged in, and it will automatically detect all your sensors and display them here. And this last one here, the external voltage with the ID of number 2 is negative 4.81 volts. So that's what our battery pack is at right now. But it's negative. I think it's because I have my leads connected backwards. Now it's safe to do it as long as you don't go over 100 volts for this sensor here. So I went ahead, swapped it around, and we're back at 4.81. I guess it was a little loose whenever I connected the first time. So now we're at 4.86 volts. So we know it's working correctly, and as well as our RX voltage is sitting at 5.22 volts. So that's this battery pack here. So that's your internal one that is on your servo connectors. So if we go back, we can now choose the sensor we want. So we can have up to 4 at a time. So you can actually rearrange this if you want. You can have that the second battery pack at the top or your RX at the top. You can set this up however you want. So if we wanted to set an alarm and set an alarm on this battery pack here, being that it's already on the display, we'll go ahead into it and we'll click that sensor and see you can actually change it up if you want to, but we're going to keep it as that. Now you go down here, you see this little X, you'll tap that X. Oh, so it says 5 volts max. Let's bring that up to, let's say 7 volts. So it was actually giving us an over voltage alarm. So that was a good demonstration right there that you can actually set an over voltage alarm. I'm not sure if you're going to be putting a alternator on your RC that will charge the pack as you're running, especially if you're using like gas or nitro engine on your RC. You could probably do that and you'll be able to monitor and make sure you're not overcharging your battery pack. As well as you can set your low voltage. So you want to make sure which one you selected. So my low voltage is set to 4. Now, was like 5.22, I think, volts. Let's go ahead and turn this up to 5. It's 3. So it's over that voltage. So it's the battery pack's lower than this voltage. So it's sounding the alarm. We'll go down 1. It should go up because it's at 5.22. No, it's actually probably going a little lower. So you can set it at the lowest voltage you want it at. So let's say you're running your servos and your servos need at least 6 volts. You can go in here and set it at 6 volts. So if it goes below 6 volts, your alarm will go off to let you know that you're not getting the performance you want out of your servos. For you nitro guys, even your ESC, let's say your ESC BSC starts to die, this will let you know if you set it, and then you can always turn it off or on. And with this controller here, you can actually program it on a button to turn this on or off if you want. Now, since the last one isn't being used, I'm going to go ahead and select that one. And if I go all the way down and remember the external voltage 2, ID 2, we're going to select that one. Now, I have it. If I look, it's being displayed here as the last one because it's in the number 4 position. Is being displayed. But I want to monitor it. So I'm going to go back to it. And I'm going to flip that switch. Now I can set the high alarm and the low alarm. So if it's the high alarm, if it goes over 5 volts, it will sound the alarm. If it goes below 4 volts, it will sound the alarm. And then depending on which one you're on, make sure it's highlighted. So if I want to change the low alarm, the plus will change it up. Let's see if we go. Yep, there it is. It's going off. And it will not let you go above the voltage that you have for your high alarm. So if you wanted to go high, you need to make sure your high alarm's a lot higher to then change it. But we can change it to wherever we want. So it'll be notified. So it will notify us, or we can turn it off and just use the screen to monitor it itself. And that's pretty much how you use your external sensors, as well as set an alarm for your external, as well as your internal voltage meter in your receiver. Thanks for watching. And if this video helped you out, please give me a thumbs up. If you like my content that I have here on this channel, please subscribe to my channel, as well as happy RCing. Until next time.